My name is Serafina Vale. I'm 32, and the moment I walked into my fiance's family home, I felt the world tilt beneath me in a way I could never have anticipated. I had spent weeks preparing myself, rehearsing polite smiles, soft laughter, and the delicate way a humble, naive girl should behave. My fiance, Elias, had always been candid about his family's wealth and their sometimes harsh expectations. Just be yourself, he'd said, but I knew better. I had to play the part carefully if I wanted to belong or at least survive the weekend. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the revelation that awaited me that night. The moment I stepped through the double doors of the Vale estate, I was greeted with a chilling blend of smiles that didn't reach the eyes, whispers that carried sharp edges, and the unmistakable gaze of someone who already knew my every secret, or at least my assumed inadequacies. It was Mrs. Vale, Elias's mother, whose lips curled into a smile so perfect it should have been comforting, but her eyes were calculating, like a chess master anticipating every move. And then, as we gathered in the grand living room, surrounded by ornate chandeliers, golden mirrors, and polished mahogany furniture that reflected a life of unimaginable privilege, I overheard the words that shattered the delicate mask I had worked so hard to maintain. I suppose it will be entertaining, seeing how little she knows about the world she's trying to enter. My stomach dropped. It wasn't meant for me to hear, but I did, and the betrayal stung deeper than I could have imagined. I turned to Elias, hoping for some form of reassurance, some gentle touch or knowing glance, but his face was unreadable, his expression distant, and I realized in that moment that this was going to be far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. If you've ever felt the ground vanish beneath your feet in front of the people you hoped would accept you, you'll understand exactly the horror that gripped me. Before I go on, make sure you stick with me to the end of this story because what happened next changed everything, not just for me, but for the person I thought I knew better than anyone. Let me take you back a little to explain why I felt the need to act naive, to pretend I was less knowledgeable, less worldly than I truly was. I was born in a small town, Crescent Hollow, a place where everyone knew each other's business and secrets were currency. My parents, well, they were good people, loving in their quiet, restrained way, but life was never generous with them, and by extension, it wasn't generous with me. I learned early that humility, politeness, and quiet smiles could get you far when your family had no power, no money, and little influence. My childhood was a tapestry of small victories and larger disappointments. The time I won first place in the regional spelling bee, only to see my accomplishment quietly ignored because my parents couldn't afford the celebration. The countless birthdays spent wishing for friends who were always too busy to call or visit. Yet I grew strong in those silences, learning to observe people carefully, to read subtle cues, to know when words were meant to protect or deceive. Elias entered my life during a time when I had almost stopped believing that love could be uncomplicated. We met at a writers' conference, both of us vying for attention in a room full of ambitious strangers. He was charming, intelligent, and above all, patient. Our first conversations were easy, laughter spilling freely, a connection that felt effortless. But when he introduced me to the reality of his world, his family, their wealth, their influence, I realized that love wasn't enough. I needed strategy. So I became Serafina Vale, the careful, unassuming version of myself. I wore modest dresses, spoke softly, and laughed at the jokes that I would normally have found bland or trite. I downplayed my ambitions, concealed my knowledge of art, literature, and the business world, and even pretended to be clumsier, less polished. Every detail was calculated because I knew that one misstep could invite ridicule, or worse, judgment. And yet, despite my precautions, the night at the Vale estate began unraveling my carefully crafted facade in ways I couldn't anticipate. The first dinner was a masterclass in subtle power plays. My fiancé's siblings, particularly his younger brother Julian, seemed to take immediate pleasure in testing my boundaries. Their questions were innocent on the surface. "Oh, what school did you attend again?" Or "Have you ever traveled abroad?" But I could feel the undercurrent, the unspoken proving yourself challenge beneath every word. I answered carefully, softening the edges of my knowledge to fit the role I had rehearsed so many times. The tension was palpable, yet I maintained a polite smile, nodding where appropriate, laughing where necessary. But the more I tried to blend in, the more I sensed that something darker was brewing. Then came the incident that would forever change my perception of the family I had hoped to call my own. Julian, smiling so sweetly it made my skin crawl, leaned closer across the dinner table and whispered words that were meant for the room but delivered directly to me. "You really think he'll marry someone like you? You with your little upbringing, your modest life, your naive charm. It's cute, really, but don't expect him to protect you when the real world shows its teeth." I froze. My spoon trembled in my hand. The roast chicken I was attempting to cut suddenly seemed like an impossible task. Elias's mother, who had been chatting with distant relatives, looked up, her gaze slicing across the table like a blade, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she would join in, laughing or condemning, or perhaps both. Elias shifted slightly in his seat, his jaw tightening, but said nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and I realized that I was alone in a room full of people who had already judged me and found me wanting. That night, I retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me, trying to steady my racing heart. Tears blurred my vision as I sank onto the bed, my mind replaying every moment, every word, every glance. I questioned myself, wondering if I had been foolish to believe that love could shield me from cruelty, that my careful performance could protect me from the judgment of those who wielded wealth and status like weapons. But amid the fear and humiliation, a quiet ember of determination sparked within me. I realized that if I survived this weekend, it wouldn't be because of Elias's love alone. It would be because of my own strength, my ability to see the truth and stand firm in it. As I lay there, listening to the distant laughter and clinking of glasses from the dining room, a strange sound broke the rhythm of my thoughts, a faint buzzing from the study next door. Curious and cautious, I approached the slightly ajar door and peeked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Julian, seated at Elias's father's desk, scrolling through what appeared to be my personal emails and messages on a laptop I hadn't even realized was left in the living room. My heart lurched, a mix of betrayal and rage surging through me. I had worked so hard to control what they knew about me, to present the version of myself that would be deemed acceptable. And yet here was proof that my carefully constructed image was being dissected, analyzed, weaponized even, without my knowledge. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance, and caught myself against the doorframe. The betrayal wasn't just in the words or the looks at dinner, it was in this, the quiet invasion of my privacy, the subtle message that no matter how carefully I played the part, they had already claimed power over me. And then, as if sensing my presence, Julian's head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine with a cold, calculating gleam. He didn't speak, but the unspoken threat was clear. He knew I was watching, and yet he was unafraid. I retreated back to the bedroom, heart hammering, mind racing. Sleep was impossible. My thoughts spiraled between fear, anger, and a growing resolve. I couldn't let this family define my worth, nor could I allow their judgments to dictate my future with Elias. Something had to give. By the time dawn broke, casting a pale light across the opulent room, I had made a decision. I would continue the act, for now, carefully, subtly, but I would also start gathering the truth. There were questions I needed to ask, boundaries I needed to set, and secrets I needed to uncover. I had always believed that love could be simple, that honesty and kindness were enough, but the Vale family had shown me that love in isolation is fragile, easily manipulated, and tested beyond endurance. What I didn't yet know was how deep the betrayals ran, how cunningly the lies had been crafted, or just how dangerous the next few days would become. And as I prepared myself for breakfast with Elias and his family, a sudden message on my phone made me freeze. Not everyone is who they seem. Be careful who you trust, even the one who calls you theirs. The words were anonymous, but they carried the weight of an unspoken truth. My world, carefully arranged around love and trust, was about to crumble, and there was no one to catch me when it fell. I never thought a single weekend could feel like an entire lifetime, but by the second morning at the Vale estate, I realized just how fragile my carefully constructed facade really was. The sunlight poured through the massive windows of the dining room, highlighting the marble floors and gilded furniture, making the house feel almost like a museum. Everything here screamed wealth, status, and control, and I felt painfully small in comparison, like an exhibit to be judged rather than a guest to be welcomed. Breakfast was quiet at first. Elias seemed preoccupied, glancing occasionally at me with a mix of worry and restraint, as if he knew I had sensed the undercurrents of hostility the night before. His family, however, operated in a different rhythm entirely. Julian was already seated at the table, smirking with that same unsettling confidence, while Mrs. Vale carried herself with that impeccable poise that hid the sharpness beneath. And then there was Mrs. Vale's sister, Vivian, a woman whose kindness was as calculated as it was intoxicating. She smiled at me as I entered, her words dripping with sweetness. "Serafina, darling, I do hope you slept well. You must know, in this house, appearances are everything, and everyone appreciates a careful guest." I nodded, smiling politely, but inside, a storm was building. I couldn't shake the words from last night, or the image of Julian sifting through my private messages. The Vale family wasn't just judging me, they were testing me, probing for weaknesses, and perhaps even planning to exploit them. It was during breakfast that Elias finally spoke. His voice was low, careful, almost hesitant. "Sarah, are you okay? You seemed distracted last night." I forced a laugh, brushing it off with a simple, "I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed by the house." He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, but his eyes betrayed his concern. I wanted to tell him the truth, that his family was watching me like prey, that Julian had invaded my privacy, but I knew that revealing it now would only make me appear weak, vulnerable. Instead, I chose the path I had honed for years: diplomacy, patience, and quiet observation. As breakfast ended and the family dispersed to their respective morning routines, I found myself wandering the hallways of the estate, trying to familiarize myself with the sprawling space, and, more importantly, trying to collect my thoughts. Each room was a reminder of a life I didn't belong to yet, a life I desperately wanted to navigate successfully if I hoped to build a future with Elias. That's when I remembered the message on my phone. I pulled it out again, studying the words carefully. "Not everyone is who they seem. Be careful who you trust, even the one who calls you theirs." My heart pounded as I considered the possibilities. Who could have sent it? Was it a family member, a friend, or someone entirely unknown? The ambiguity gnawed at me, leaving me unsettled, questioning every interaction, every smile, every gesture. I realized that the Vale family's power didn't just come from wealth, it came from their mastery of control, manipulation, and the subtle art of intimidation. Flashbacks hit me suddenly, memories of my own family and childhood, and I understood now why I had developed this armor of careful observation. Growing up in Crescent Hollow, I had learned that trust was earned in increments, often through pain, disappointment, or betrayal. My parents loved me, certainly, but they had their own struggles, and sometimes their guidance felt more like lessons in survival than nurturing. My older sister, Madeline, had been my closest confidant, yet even she had moments of jealousy that left scars I still carried. I remembered the time she revealed a secret of mine to the neighborhood, a small betrayal that felt colossal to my young self, and the humiliation had burned long after the tears had dried. That childhood had taught me vigilance, caution, and the importance of reading people before surrendering my trust. And now, in this grand house, surrounded by strangers who could make or break my future, those lessons had never felt more relevant. The next few hours were a careful dance of observation. I noticed how Mrs. Vale subtly shifted conversations, redirecting praise to her favorite children while casting thinly veiled doubts on the rest. Julian moved through the room like a predator, charming one moment and condescending the next. Vivian seemed almost too kind, her smiles too rehearsed, and I suspected she was watching me as carefully as I watched her. Even Elias, who had seemed my steadfast ally, was operating in this complex web of expectations and unspoken rules. I realized then that love, even with someone you trust, could be complicated by family dynamics, secrets, and hidden agendas. It was during one of these quiet observations that the first betrayal hit me. I had gone into the library, seeking refuge among the shelves of leather-bound books, hoping to find a moment of peace. But Julian was already there, pretending to browse while clearly tracking my movements. He smirked when he saw me, leaning casually against the doorway. "Serafina," he said, his tone mockingly sweet. "I didn't expect you to be so curious." My pulse quickened. "I'm just looking for a book," I replied cautiously, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," he said, stepping closer, the smirk never leaving his face. "But remember, curiosity can get you into trouble, especially here." He glanced at the books, then back at me, his eyes sharp and assessing. I forced a smile, retreating toward the door, but not before noticing a faint envelope sticking out from beneath the desk. My curiosity overpowered caution, and I bent to pick it up. Inside was a folder containing printed copies of my social media posts, personal emails, and even private conversations with friends I had never intended for this family to see. My stomach sank. The betrayal was no longer subtle. It was tangible, concrete, and deliberate. Someone in this family had gone to the lengths of collecting and printing my personal correspondence, turning my private life into a source of entertainment or judgment. I barely noticed the sound of Elias entering the library until he spoke. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" His voice carried concern, but also an edge I hadn't heard before. I held up the folder, my hands trembling. "Look at this," I said quietly, my voice tight with anger and hurt. "Do you know anything about this?" He hesitated, avoiding my gaze. I didn't know," he admitted finally, his voice low. "I swear, I had no idea Julian would do something like this. I thought he was joking." I felt a cold twist of betrayal in my chest, not just at Julian, but at Elias. His distance, his hesitation to fully defend me in front of his family, revealed a complicity I hadn't anticipated. How could the person I loved, the one I trusted, allow this to happen without immediate intervention? Before I could respond, Julian's voice cut through the tension, smooth and cruel. "Oh, don't take it personally, Sarah. We just like to know the people our family entertains. It's all harmless, really, unless you make it not harmless." His laughter echoed through the library, sharp and unrelenting. I felt cornered, exposed, humiliated, and yet a strange determination started to surface. I wouldn't be the victim here. I couldn't let them manipulate me into silence. And yet, I also knew that confrontation without strategy would only give them more power. The rest of the day was a careful exercise in survival. I smiled when smiles were expected, laughed at jokes that I found hollow, and kept my interactions measured, never letting my emotions betray the storm building inside. But even as I navigated the social minefield, I was aware of the growing tension between Elias and his brother. Julian's provocations weren't just aimed at me, they were designed to test Elias, to see if he would defend his choice or falter under the weight of family expectations. It was a delicate dance, and I realized that the love I had thought was unbreakable would be tested in ways I had never imagined. By evening, the tension reached a boiling point. Elias and I had retreated to the privacy of our guest room, and I confronted him directly. "Elias," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "how much did you know about what your family was planning, about Julian reading my messages, about them trying to dig into my life?" His face fell, a mixture of guilt and helplessness. "I didn't know," he repeated, his tone strained. "I truly didn't. Sarah, please, you have to believe me. I would never let them hurt you intentionally."
I searched his eyes for the truth, and while I wanted to believe him, the seed of doubt had been planted. Trust, once fractured, is hard to restore, and now I had to make a decision. Do I continue to play the part, silent and careful, or do I expose the web of manipulation and risk everything? As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that this weekend was no longer just about meeting Elias's family. It was about survival, strategy, and reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped from me. I understood that the path forward required patience, observation, and a willingness to navigate the treacherous waters of betrayal. And just as sleep began to take me, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message appeared, sending a shiver down my spine. Not everything you see is real. Watch closely. The truth is worse than you think. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. The Vale family's web of secrets was far more tangled than I had imagined, and somewhere within it lay a truth that could either destroy me or set me free.
The third day at the Vale estate felt like walking through a dream, or a nightmare, where every smile hit a dagger and every word could be a trap. By now, I had perfected my calm exterior, masking the turmoil roiling inside. Yet, the more I tried to play the humble, naive fiancé, the more I realized that my pretense was both my shield and my cage. The family's scrutiny was relentless, and I could feel the invisible eyes of Julian, Vivian, and even Elias weighing me with quiet judgment. That morning, breakfast had already begun with its usual ritual of careful glances, subtle digs, and polite conversation that carried sharp undercurrents. Julian, in particular, seemed determined to unravel me. Every question he asked was layered with implication, every compliment laced with condescension. "I hear you enjoying reading," he said casually, "but do you ever discuss your thoughts with anyone who truly understands the world you're stepping into?" The words were designed to sting, a reminder that I was an outsider in a house where intellect was both currency and weapon. I smiled, keeping my voice soft. I'd try to learn from everyone I meet, but inwardly my blood boiled. This wasn't just about testing my knowledge or charm. It was about control, dominance, and amusement at my expense. After breakfast, I decided I could no longer be passive. I needed to uncover the full extent of the Vale family's games, the depth of their surveillance, and most importantly, the truth about Elias's role. Was he an innocent bystander, genuinely unaware of Julian's schemes, or had he been complicit in some way? The thought twisted in my chest, leaving a bitter taste. I spent the late morning discreetly retracing my steps, revisiting the library where Julian had rifled through my messages. My eyes caught something I had overlooked the day before, a small key hidden beneath a desk drawer. Curious, I pocketed it, my mind racing. What could it open? A drawer? A cabinet? Perhaps even a secret room? My pulse quickened. The possibilities terrified me, but my need for answers outweighed my fear. It wasn't long before the first revelation hit. Using the key, I unlocked a hidden cabinet tucked behind a large bookshelf in the study. Inside were folders, meticulously labeled with names, dates, and events. My heart pounded as I sifted through the papers, realizing that Julian's spying had been part of a much larger operation. These weren't just casual observations, they were dossiers, personal investigations into not only me, but every acquaintance, every friend, every connection Elias had ever had. The breadth of the surveillance was staggering. I felt like I was staring into a dark, twisted mirror of control and obsession. I could almost hear my mother's voice from my childhood, warning me about people who watched too closely, who used kindness as a trap, who valued appearances above truth. And now, in this opulent house, I was living that very nightmare. Before I could process everything, a sudden noise made me freeze. Julian's voice, soft but menacing, drifted from the hallway. "Looking for something, Sarah?" My blood ran cold. He had found me. I turned slowly, holding the folder like a shield, and met his smirk.
I was just curious, I stammered, my heart racing. Curiosity can be dangerous, he said, stepping closer, especially when you're dealing with people who value secrecy more than loyalty. Do you know what happens to those who pry too deeply? I swallowed, fighting back the rising panic. Yet even as fear threatened to overwhelm me, a spark of defiance ignited. I straightened, holding his gaze. I'm not afraid of truth, I said quietly. Julian laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Bold words, he said, backing away slightly, but words are cheap. Actions are what matter. And with that, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving me with the folders and a rising sense of dread. By midday, the tension in the house had reached a pitch fever. I noticed subtle shifts in behavior, Elias avoiding eye contact, Vivian watching me with an almost imperceptible frown, and Mrs. Vale circulating with her usual controlled grace, yet now tinged with something sharper, more calculating. It was as if the entire household had sensed my discovery, the unspoken knowledge that I had seen too much. I felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely empowered. The dichotomy of fear and control coursed through me, sharpening my instincts and forcing me to strategize carefully. Then came the revelation that shook me to my core. In the late afternoon, while helping Elias in the study, under the pretense of organizing some paperwork, I stumbled upon an envelope addressed to him. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it discreetly. Inside were photographs of me, taken without my knowledge over the past few months. Some were candid snapshots of me meeting friends, laughing in cafes, even walking alone in the park. Others were intimate, moments I thought were private, now weaponized in the hands of Elias's family. The betrayal cut deep, not just from Julian, but from the realization that Elias had never told me about the family's obsession with surveillance. I confronted him immediately, my voice shaking with a mixture of hurt and fury. "Elias, why didn't you tell me?" His face went pale, guilt flashing in his eyes. I thought I could handle it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to scare you. I wanted to protect you, Serafina. I never wanted you to feel trapped by them." The sincerity in his eyes battled with the anger in my chest. I wanted to believe him, but the evidence was undeniable. The trust I had placed in him had been compromised, not entirely malicious, but dangerously naive. That night, after dinner, the tension escalated into a confrontation I hadn't anticipated. Julian, emboldened by my reactions, cornered me in the drawing room, his expression sharp and predatory. "You think you understand our world now?" he sneered. "You've seen a fraction, Sarah, and yet you believe you can navigate it. The truth? You're still just a naive girl playing at sophistication. And trust me, the real Vale family doesn't forgive naivete." I stood my ground, my chest tight, fists clenched. "I may be naive in your eyes," I said steadily, "but I'm not weak. I've faced betrayal before, and I know how to survive it. Don't mistake caution for cowardice." Julian's smirk faltered, replaced with something sharper, more calculating. He stepped back, and for the first time, I sensed hesitation, a crack in his armor. It was then that another twist appeared. Vivian approached, her smile warm but her eyes troubled. "Serafina," she said softly, "there's more to this family than you realize. Not everything you've discovered was meant to hurt you. Some of it is to test you, to see your strength. But be careful. Sometimes the lines between protection and manipulation are blurred, and it's easy to be lost in the middle." Her words, cryptic yet oddly comforting, planted a seed of doubt. Could it be that not all of Elias's family's actions were malicious? Was there a method to the madness, or was this merely another layer of control? As the evening drew on, I retreated to my room once again, my mind a whirlpool of emotions: fear, betrayal, anger, and a flickering sense of empowerment. I realized that the weekend, which had begun as a simple introduction to Elias's family, had transformed into a trial, a test of endurance, wit, and emotional resilience. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that the ultimate revelation, the one that would either destroy me or finally grant me control, was still ahead, waiting to unfold. I couldn't sleep that night. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer, darker, more menacing, echoing the uncertainty that had taken hold of my life. I reviewed every interaction, every whisper, every glance, and pieced together a disturbing pattern. The Vale family's power wasn't just in wealth, it was in knowledge, in the ability to dissect, predict, and manipulate. And I was right in the center of it, a target and a participant in a game I hadn't agreed to play. Then, just before dawn, my phone buzzed again. A message appeared, more personal this time, almost intimate in its warning. Trust no one completely. The one who loves you may not be the one who protects you. Watch, learn, survive. The words settled over me like a cold mist, chilling and electrifying all at once. I knew then that the final phase of this ordeal was coming. The web of lies, betrayals, and hidden motives was about to reveal itself in a way that could no longer be avoided. And I, Serafina Vale, would have to confront not only the Vale family, but the truth about Elias and about myself. The morning sunlight pierced through the heavy curtains of my guest room, yet it felt colder than ever. I had spent the night replaying every conversation, every hidden glance, and every betrayal that had unfolded at the Vale estate. My heart was a storm of anger, fear, and the tiniest flicker of hope. The hope that truth, once uncovered, could finally give me the clarity and strength I so desperately needed. Today, I decided, would be the day I confronted the lies, the manipulation, and the uncertainty. I couldn't continue living in a gilded cage, no matter how beautifully it was adorned. The breakfast table was as tense as ever. Julian's smirk was sharper, more confident, as if he knew that I had discovered the folders and the photographs. Vivian's smile, gentle as it had seemed yesterday, now carried a quiet warning. Mrs. Vale's composure was perfect, but I could see it flicker just slightly when our eyes met across the table. Elias, seated beside me, looked nervous, a taut line along his jaw betraying the worry I had seen before, but also a hesitation that suggested he still didn't fully understand the storm he had unleashed. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Today, I would no longer be the naive, cautious girl I had pretended to be. It started subtly. I asked questions about the family's traditions, their values, and their expectations for spouses in the household. Julian tried his usual tactics, his tone laced with condescension, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I spoke with calm precision, revealing just enough knowledge to make him pause, just enough insight to unsettle his confidence. I understand your family values legacy and influence, I said carefully, my voice steady. I respect that, but a true marriage is about partnership, trust, and respect, things that no wealth or manipulation can replace. Julian's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The first crack had appeared. Then came the confrontation in the study, the confrontation I had been preparing for since the moment I discovered the folders and the photographs. I found Julian there, alone, pretending to read. I walked in, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk," I said firmly. His eyes widened slightly, surprised by my directness. "About what?" he asked, trying to mask his unease with false calm. I placed the folders on the desk, sliding them toward him. "About every secret, every lie, every manipulation. I know what you've been doing. I know about the dossiers, the photographs, the messages. I know about the surveillance, and I'm not here to play your games anymore." Julian's face shifted rapidly, from smugness to irritation, then to a brief, unguarded panic. You shouldn't have seen those," he stammered. "That's family business." "Family business?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You invaded my privacy, turned my life into a source of entertainment and judgment, and called it family business? That's betrayal, Julian, pure and simple." For the first time, he didn't have a response. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Later that afternoon, I cornered Elias privately. "You knew about this, didn't you?" I demanded, my chest tight with hurt and disbelief. "I didn't know about the extent," he admitted, his voice quiet, filled with regret. I knew Julian and the others were protective in their own way, but I didn't realize they would go this far. I should have told you. I should have defended you immediately. His words were sincere, but they were not enough to erase the weeks of betrayal and humiliation. I realized then that love alone was not enough. Boundaries were essential, and trust needed constant reinforcement. Elias, I said softly, I love you, but love without accountability is dangerous. I can't ignore what's happened, and I can't allow anyone, family or otherwise, to manipulate me. If we are to have a future, it has to be built on transparency and respect, not secrets and fear. His eyes filled with understanding, and he nodded slowly, realizing the gravity of the lesson I was teaching him.
The final confrontation with Mrs. Vale and Vivian came at dinner that evening. I had prepared myself for conflict, for ridicule, for sharp words, but I had also prepared for clarity. I know what has been happening, I began, my voice calm but resolute. I know about the surveillance, the manipulation, and the judgments, and I'm here to set boundaries, not as a guest, but as someone who will be your family through marriage. I will not allow deceit, control, or humiliation to define my life or my relationship with Elias. Mrs. Vale's eyes narrowed for a brief moment, then softened slightly. Vivian nodded, her expression unreadable, but I sensed a grudging respect forming. You are strong, Serafina, Vivian said quietly. Stronger than we anticipated. Perhaps stronger than this family has allowed itself to see before. The words, though faint, were a balm to the wounds of the past days. I realized then that empowerment wasn't about crushing those who hurt you. It was about standing firm, setting boundaries, and refusing to be diminished by others' games. By the time the weekend ended, I had made peace with several things. Julian remained a challenge, a reminder that some people's cruelty is persistent, but I no longer feared him. Elias had learned, in the hard way only experience teaches, that love without transparency is fragile, and he had committed to change. And I, Serafina Vale, had discovered my own resilience, the power of courage, and the value of self-respect. The Vale estate, once a place of fear and judgment, had become a crucible in which my strength was forged, and I emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakably determined to protect both my heart and my dignity. As I packed my bags, preparing to leave, I reflected on the journey, the betrayal, the manipulation, the moments of fear and humiliation, and I understood something profound. Life is full of tests, often hidden behind the faces of those we love, the families we join, and the worlds we step into. But every betrayal, every challenge is an opportunity to assert boundaries, reclaim power, and choose who gets to define your worth. I smiled to myself, feeling a lightness I hadn't known in days. The Vale family had tried to break me, to expose weakness, and perhaps in some ways they had. But what they hadn't broken was my spirit, my sense of self, and my resolve to live with dignity and courage. As I drove away from the estate, the sprawling mansion disappearing behind me, I felt a strange mixture of relief, empowerment, and anticipation. Life would continue, challenges would arise, but I knew now that I could face them with strength, clarity, and the unwavering belief that no one, not even family, not even love, could define me without my consent. Have you ever experienced betrayal that shook your very foundation only to realize it made you stronger in the end? Share your story in the comments. I promise your voice matters and your strength is waiting to be recognized.